Hello friends, welcome back to your channel. If you're ready, let's begin tonight's story. When poverty and hardship crush you, you forget a lot of things. You even step over the lines you once promised yourself you would never cross. I can't count how many times I was humiliated over a few coins while hauling cargo. People thought that just because they rented my pickup truck, I was also supposed to carry their load from the truck all the way to the 7th floor. The same people who got pushed around everywhere else turned into successful businessmen whenever they dealt with workers and pickup drivers like me. Anyway, that's a story for another day. One afternoon, exhausted and worn out, I finally made it home. My wife immediately started shouting. The landlord had come by again, making another embarrassing scene. We were already 3 months behind on rent. That night, I had a delivery for a factory. The load weighed nearly 1 ton. The customer was too cheap to hire a larger truck, but he offered me a good payment. I looked at my wife and said, "Don't worry. With this delivery, we'll pay 2 months of rent. I'll throw the money in the landlord's face," and finally shut him up. She calmed down. I managed to get a little rest. When I woke up, dinner was waiting for me, but I was already running late. I grabbed 2 potato patties, stuffed them into some bread, jumped behind the wheel, and drove off. Half an hour later, I reached the industrial district. A forklift loaded 4 heavy barrels into the back of my pickup. The factory manager looked at me and said, "Asgar, this shipment is worth its weight in gold. Whatever happens to you, do not touch the brakes until you reach your destination. You came highly recommended. That's why we're trusting you. We've also installed GPS trackers on the barrels." I nodded. "Don't worry, engineer. If I were a thief, I wouldn't be living like this." He ignored my joke. When I asked about my payment, he simply said, "They'll pay you at the factory." After whispering, "In the name of God," I started driving. It was already midnight. The highway was almost empty. I drove as carefully as possible. Inside those barrels was an extremely valuable metal. No one passing by could tell what I was carrying. That made me feel a little safer. About an hour later, I turned onto the factory road, a road swallowed by darkness, so dark. It looked as if it led nowhere. Fear sat beside me in the passenger seat. We traveled together. I wasn't afraid of ghosts. I was afraid of thieves. People looking for easy money always know which truck is carrying what and exactly how much it's worth. I pressed harder on the accelerator. If someone tried jumping onto the truck, they wouldn't get the chance. Then my phone rang. It was the engineer. He asked where I was. "I've entered the road." He immediately replied, "Say Bismillah, and whatever happens, don't touch the brakes until you reach the factory yard." I laughed. "All right, Bismillah." The moment I hung up, I noticed something limping in the middle of the road. I honked. It refused to move. I had no choice. I hit the brakes. Then I noticed its feet. They were turned backward. That's when I remembered the engineer's warning. I gripped the steering wheel tightly and began calling God's name. The figure, or whatever it was, slowly limped off the road. I slammed on the accelerator and sped past it. At that point, I no longer cared about the cargo or even the truck. I just wanted to escape. Then, deep inside that endless darkness, I saw glowing eyes on both sides of the road. They were far too high above the ground, higher than any normal animal. For just 1 second, my eyes drifted toward them. That was enough. The truck left the road. I hit the brakes, but the overloaded pickup couldn't stop. It crashed straight into a lonely tree. The barrels never moved, but the front of my truck was completely destroyed. Terrified, I climbed out. The factory lights were visible in the distance. I wanted to call the engineer, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. He had already checked my location, which meant those GPS trackers were probably fake. I stood there, staring at the damaged hood. Then, something caught my eye. There was something sitting on top of the cargo. I opened my mouth to shout, but no sound came out. It wasn't human. It looked like one of those creatures from old science fiction movies. Huge black eyes, smooth skin, no hair. It crouched on all four, right on top of my truck. The moment I saw it, my legs gave out beneath me. I collapsed beside the tree. I was almost unconscious. Then I heard another vehicle approaching. For a second, I thought thieves had arrived to steal the cargo. What frightened me most was that nobody even looked at me. I forced myself awake, terrified they would take everything. But it had all been an illusion. The cargo was exactly where it had been. I was alone, lying on the ground. I checked my phone. 40 minutes had passed. The engineer had called several times. I climbed back into the truck. After several attempts, the engine finally started. A horrible grinding noise echoed from underneath. I ignored it and kept driving. Half an hour later, I finally reached the factory. The moment I stopped outside the gate, an old man ran out and opened the heavy sliding gate. He looked at my truck. "What happened, son?" I didn't answer. Inside the factory yard, 3 brand new pickup trucks were parked. I couldn't help thinking, couldn't one of those have delivered this shipment instead of me? While I was lost in thought, someone knocked on my window. It was the old man. "Come down. The boys will unload the cargo." He led me to a wooden bed beneath a tall pine tree. A cool breeze drifted through the night. A narrow stream flowed beside us. The old man warned me, "Don't wash your face or hands with this water. It comes from the factory." Then he called the engineer and made sure I received my payment. As I sat there, he sliced open a watermelon. "We expected you much earlier. You can see what happened." I crashed. "By the way, why didn't those new pickups bring the cargo?" The old man smiled. "Because their drivers aren't here. To tell you the truth, they're afraid to drive this road at night." I stared at him. "So, what I saw was real?" He nodded. "Most of them are harmless, but human beings naturally fear anything stronger than themselves. That's why no other factory was ever built around here." Then he looked directly into my eyes. "The fact that they revealed themselves to you means you have the gift." For nearly half an hour, I told him everything about my miserable life, my debts, my unpaid bills, the endless struggle to survive. The whole time, he simply smiled. Sometimes, he even laughed. Eventually, I became irritated. I thought he was laughing at me. Finally, he looked at me and quietly said, "When I look at you, I remember my younger days. I used to carry cargo in the Desful market. My pockets were always empty, until one day I met someone who changed my life forever." I pointed toward the factory's dusty yard and asked, "So, does that mean you're rich now?" The old man smiled. "I have enough money to buy this factory, along with its owner. But there's a reason I choose to stay here. At first, I thought he was just another dreamer. One of those people who become so lost in their own fantasies that they eventually believe them." Then, a moment later, the engineer called him. The way the old man spoke made it sound as if he owned the factory himself. After finishing the watermelon, I grabbed a blanket and fell asleep on the wooden bed. I woke up around 9 the next morning and headed home. My plan was to repair the pickup truck with the money I had earned. Before I got there, my wife called. "The landlord is here again." To avoid another embarrassing scene, I paid 2 months of overdue rent. The landlord finally calmed down and left. The truck was still broken. I left it parked in the alley. Day and night, I searched for work. The little money I earned barely paid for my own food. One night, completely exhausted and frustrated, I sat on my prayer rug. I kept complaining to God until I fell asleep. At night, I had a dream. I was standing beneath the same tree where I had crashed the truck. A voice whispered, "Dig beneath the tree." I knelt down, started digging, and found 3 gold coins. When I woke up, morning had already arrived. Desperation made me believe the dream. I hurried back to that lonely tree, excited. I dug beneath it. There was nothing, not a single gold coin. I sat beneath its shade. There were no strange creatures, no passing cars, not even another human being. Then I thought, maybe someone at the factory could give me a ride back to town. For nearly 2 hours, I walked beneath the burning sun. When I reached the gate, the old man was sitting on the wooden bed, quietly reciting prayers. I called out. The moment he saw me, he opened the gate. "Haji, please, give me some water. I'm dying." He immediately brought me a glass of water. After drinking, I collapsed onto the bed, cursing my own stupidity. The old man asked, "What are you doing here at this hour?" Naively, I told him everything about the dream. Then I smiled bitterly. "You probably think I'm an idiot, don't you? But if you were living my life, you'd grab onto anything. I wish magic were actually real." The old man looked at me. "Magic is real." I leaned back and laughed. "If that's true. Go into that little room and come back with 4 perfect kebab skewers, Mande, and a big plate of rashti rice." Then I laughed again and lay back down. My eyes stayed fixed on the pine branches overhead until suddenly the smell of grilled meat filled the air. I jumped to my feet. The old man was walking toward me, holding a tray. Everything I had jokingly asked for was right there. I stared at him in disbelief. He smiled. "This isn't magic. It's simply the factory's lunch. And honestly, the kebab isn't that great. The rice is Pakistani." I took the tray and laughed. I should have asked God for something better. The old man's expression changed. His eyes became serious. "For everything in this world, you must seek out those who belong to it." We talked for hours about spirituality, mysticism, and philosophy. Those conversations don't belong in this story. By sunset, the old man finally admitted everything material he possessed had come through a spiritual path. He told me that because my heart was simple and my intentions were pure, he could show me the same path. Back then, I was drowning in poverty, so I agreed. At first, I didn't believe any of it until the old man showed me things I still can't explain. Eventually, I became his disciple. The first thing he did was help me get hired at the factory. Transportation was provided. I worked double shifts. Sometimes I never even went home. I'd stay at the factory just to listen to him. I had become addicted, not to drugs, but to his words. The job covered our rent. There was enough left for my wife and my son as my debt slowly disappeared. The creditors finally stopped knocking at my door. But whenever 4 stones fall from the sky, one always lands on my head, out of nowhere. The landlord raised the rent. My pickup truck was still sitting broken in the alley. Then something even worse happened. My little boy became sick. Without warning, his body would begin shaking. He'd lose consciousness. He kept saying he smelled something strange. Then his eyes would lock onto empty space. The doctor diagnosed him with epilepsy. He said that as long as he stayed on medication, he would be all right. But he also needed a peaceful environment. The neighborhood we lived in was anything but peaceful. It was filled with criminals, drug addicts, and violent people, men, women, even children. Everyone cursed all day long. My wife finally said, "If the landlord wants to play games, let's move." I searched everywhere for another house. Nothing was affordable. Another argument broke out. I stormed out of the house. For several hours, I stood on the street waiting for the factory shuttle. Even there, I got into an argument with a drug addict who mistook me for his dealer. When I reached the factory, I felt like crying. The old man looked at my face. "Come see me after your shift." A few hours later, during the break, I sat beside him. "Haji, I'm completely broke. It feels like God has chosen me as the target for every disaster." The old man calmly replied, "You're a helpless man. Material things are nothing. You shouldn't waste your life chasing them." His words made me angry. I snapped away. "Everyone in this world is fighting just to survive. If you had a wife and child, you wouldn't be saying those things. You sit here as if the whole world means nothing to you. I never should have opened my heart to you." While I was speaking, the old man kept his eyes closed, quietly whispering to himself. I turned to leave. Then suddenly, a huge black cobra rose beside the wooden bed. I screamed, "Haji, get up. It's going to bite you." The old man slowly opened his eyes. As if greeting his own grandchild, he gently stroked the cobra's head. The snake opened its mouth, dropped something into his hand, then quietly disappeared. I stood frozen, unable to believe what I had just seen. The old man opened his hand. Inside was a small golden colored stone. I stammered, Is is that gold? How do you understand the language of snakes? Do they bring you treasure?" The old man casually tossed the stone into the stream, then calmly said, "That tiny piece of gold could solve most of your problems, but to me, it has no value. Do you know why? Because whenever I want it, it always comes, and don't bother searching for it. You'll never find it." I fell to my knees, grabbed his hands. "Haji, I was wrong. Please, help me." "I was terribly wrong. Please forgive me." The old man looked at me and said, "I can show you the path, but it requires spiritual discipline. It's written in your destiny, otherwise, you would never have witnessed what you've already seen. Tell me, can you endure it?" Mm. We kept talking. My break had already ended. I didn't even care. The old man told me for 2 months I had to give up every kind of animal product and eat only one meal each day. I accepted. Honestly, meat and chicken were already luxuries in my life, but now even eggs, cheese, honey, everything had to go. Between my poverty and everything I had witnessed, I accepted without hesitation. That very night, it began. Ironically, the factory cafeteria served tuna with rice. I only ate the rice and sighed. 1 week passed. I lost weight, although I had less energy. I woke up every morning feeling strangely refreshed. By the 4th week, the old man handed me a prayer bead with 200 beads. "Now, you must begin the invocation. Every day, repeat this special prayer 500 times, and never use any other prayer beads." It wasn't an ordinary prayer. Neither God's name, nor the Prophet's name, was mentioned anywhere in it. Only 1 month remained before we had to leave our house. 6 weeks after giving up animal products, I returned to the old man. "Haji, I don't have time anymore. I need money." He calmly replied, "If you truly want, you can begin the 40-day retreat earlier." The moment he mentioned 40 days, a chill ran through my body. "Haji, how can I abandon my wife and son for 40 days? He thought for a moment. "There is another discipline. It lasts only 7 days, but it's far more difficult." "Not everyone survives it, Asghar." I forced a smile. "I can manage 1 week. I only have 2 weeks left to find enough money for another house. The old man nodded. The 7-day discipline is usually reserved for great master and powerful sorcerers. It prepares them for great summonings and powerful rituals. But you may attempt to summon Malik Abyaz. If you offer something as collateral, he can reveal hidden wealth. I stared at him. Haji, that doesn't sound human. Is it a jinn? The old man frowned. Whoa, what were you expecting? That Elon Musk would appear after 7 days and make you rich? When you deal with the unseen, you must deal with those who belong to the unseen. The angels remain bound to heaven. So you must meet the jinn. Cold sweat covered my body. I remained silent. The old man noticed my fear. He gave me several exercises, promising they would prepare me to withstand seeing them. And things aren't exactly as you imagine. At that moment, I made my choice. Either I'd survive and finally live, or I'd die and be free. Then the old man gave me another task. You'll need 2 different kinds of incense. He wrote down an address. When I asked about the prices, I nearly fainted. They were incredibly expensive. I returned and begged him for help. He shook his head. You must pay the price yourself. And not with borrowed money. Sell your pickup. Like a gambler placing his final bet, I sold it. I bought frankincense and mermaki incense, small green pieces that looked like raisins. There was only a little money left. I gave it to my wife so she could manage for a while. Then I returned to the factory with the incense. The old man inspected everything carefully. Come back in 3 days. I've already spoken to the engineer. He approved your leave. When I returned home, something terrible happened. My little boy was quietly watching cartoons. Suddenly, he began sniffing the air. Then I saw it. A shadow with long ears shot across the room like lightning. It clung to him. My son immediately collapsed. It took everything I had to bring him back, to keep them safe. I left my wife and son at my mother's house. The last 500,000 tomans I had, I gave to my mother. The appointed day finally arrived. I returned to the factory. When I told the old man about the shadow and my son's seizure, he smiled. Asghar, you truly have the gift. After only a few days of practice, you're already seeing them. I sighed. So what? Can I earn money from this? The old man looked at me. The real work begins tomorrow. But listen carefully. I've drawn a protective circle. It will keep you alive. No matter what happens, do not step outside it. During the daytime, you may sleep for only 3 hours. From the morning prayer until noon, you may leave the circle to walk and take care of your needs. And one last thing, under no circumstances, do not abandon the ritual. The moment Malik Abiaz appears, light the special candle I've prepared and burn the Mermaki incense. I thought we were heading towards some abandoned house. Instead, after dinner, the old man called me into his room. Excited, I asked, so I'll perform the retreat here? He laughed. More or less. Then he rolled back the carpet. A hidden trapdoor appeared beneath it. When he opened it, an iron ladder disappeared into darkness. The sight alone made my stomach tighten. For a moment, I wished I were back at the freight yard. I thought, Asghar, what if this old man leads you down there and murders you? But it was already too late. He climbed down first. I followed. With every step, the temperature dropped. Lower and lower. An awful smell grew stronger. What is this place? I asked. It used to be the factory's pump room. It pumped water from the well. The system was removed years ago. Now it's empty. We descended nearly 8 meters. Finally, my feet touched solid ground. The old man walked ahead and switched on a single yellow light. That lonely bulb would become my only companion. The basement was even larger than my own house, yet somehow it felt impossible to breathe. A clock hung on the wall, barely visible beneath the dim yellow light. The old man wrote down every prayer, time for the coming week, then reminded me to recite the strange invocation every night until dawn. But that wasn't all. He gave me another task, one I'm ashamed to describe. Every night, I had to write sacred verses using a special impure ink, then burn them. The moment he said that, my heart sank. But you never mentioned this before. He pointed toward the iron ladder. It's still not too late. You can climb back up and return to your miserable life. But once you leave, you'll have to find another job, because you no longer belong here. At that moment, I saw no other path, so I accepted. The old man gave me the rest of his instructions, then climbed back upstairs. The ritual hadn't even begun yet. I waited alone, until dawn. At exactly 4 in the morning, I stepped inside the mandala, sat down, and began reciting that strange prayer. My ritual always began after nightfall. The quieter I spoke, the louder my voice echoed through the basement. On the second night, as I began reciting the invocation, I heard whispering. At first, I thought it was only my own voice. Then I realized something else was walking around the protective circle. Soft whispers, footsteps. Sometimes someone laughed. I was terrified. More than once. I almost called for the old man, but I held myself back. Until dawn. I was allowed to eat only once every 24 hours. The old man called it the fast of repentance. There was no pre-dawn meal. My only food was stale barley bread, the kind of bread you could hand to a prisoner, and he could dig his way out of prison with it. After sunset, as night began, a strong smell of vinegar filled the basement. Sometimes it became so overwhelming it felt as though someone had pressed a cloth soaked in vinegar against my face. Breathing became difficult. I gasped for air. The smell grew stronger and stronger until I collapsed. While drifting in and out of consciousness, I felt something approaching me. Before I could react, the tip of my finger burst into unbearable pain. I jumped to my feet. I realized my hand had crossed outside the protective circle. There wasn't a single wound, yet it felt as if my finger were burning alive. Moments later, laughter echoed throughout the basement. Then a woman screamed. I wrapped my finger with a piece of cloth and continued writing the verses. The laughter slowly faded. A little later, I heard someone walking around the circle, wearing heavy iron boots, too afraid to see whoever it was. I never lifted my head. Just before dawn, exhausted beyond words, I heard a woman's voice. Asgar, come out. Your son is having another seizure. That old fool has driven you insane. I immediately stood up. What happened? How did you find me? My wife cried, hurry, come upstairs. The moment I was about to step outside the circle, I looked toward the ceiling. The trap door was still closed. I immediately stepped back. Something rushed away beside the circle at incredible speed. The following nights were exactly the same. Whatever wandered outside that circle never stopped watching me. Still, I endured. Finally, the 7th night arrived. I was so weak. I could barely lift my head. I had almost no strength left. Even my stale bread had run out. I continued performing the forbidden rituals. Exactly at midnight, a tremendous roar shook the basement. It sounded as though an enormous furnace had been ignited. The noise was deafening. For one horrifying moment, I thought the gates of hell had opened behind me. I curled into myself, paralyzed with fear. Then suddenly, I remembered the old man's instructions. I lit the special candle, then placed the Mermaki incense into the flame. Thick white smoke rose into the air. The smoke twisted into an impossible shape. It struck the ceiling, then slowly descended. Before my eyes, it took the form of a man. He stood outside the protective circle. His robes were black and deep crimson. I slowly stood up. His face wasn't horrifying. He had taken on the appearance of a human, but his eyes had no eyelids, and his pupils were vertical like a serpent's. He looked at me and asked, "Why have you summoned me?" I answered, I seek relief from hardship and abundance in my livelihood. He replied, every time I give you something, you will give me one bottle filled with your son's blood." I was completely overwhelmed by his presence. Without thinking, I agreed. The moment I accepted, the glowing lines of the protective circle burst into flames. Its protection vanished. Malik Abia stepped toward me. My body, already exhausted, collapsed. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the wooden bed beneath the pine tree. The morning sky stretched above me. A small glass bottle rested in my hand. I couldn't understand how the old man had carried me all the way out of the basement. He was walking nearby, smiling with satisfaction. The moment he saw I was awake, he said, "Well done. You made it. Now, wait. He will come to you himself." When the factory shuttle arrived, I climbed aboard. The workers stared at me strangely. That night, around 10 o'clock, as I stood outside my mother's house, a voice whispered into my ear, "Climb that tree. Find the crow's nest." There was an old pine tree beside the alley. I painfully climbed to the top. I reached inside the nest and found a gold ring. The next day, I sold it. It was heavy. With the money, I rented a better house, but there was a price. I had to fill one small bottle with my son's blood. It wasn't much, barely the size of a soda bottle cap. But afterward, my son looked almost lifeless, no matter how much we cared for him. He never recovered. I returned to the old man. "Haji, please help me." He calmly replied, "So far, he has helped you 3 times, and you've already given him 3 bottles. But blood isn't restored so easily. It takes an entire year to replace a single bottle. 3 bottles, 3 years." That's when I realized what I had done. Everything I had ever wanted was for my son. Now, I was sacrificing him. The jinn never gave me enough wealth to escape poverty. Only enough to make sure I'd need him again. Desperate. I returned to the old man. Another man walked out of his room. "Where's the old man?" "I don't know. I was just hired." I rushed to the engineer. He simply shrugged. He packed his things overnight and disappeared. My world collapsed. The old fox had never cared about me. Now, years have passed. I can no longer return to God, nor can I accept another gift from the creature bound to me, because every gift costs another piece of my son's life. Years later, my son's condition slowly improved. Soon, he'll even be old enough to marry. But I still live with temptation. Every single day, one afternoon, while traveling with my family, the jinn whispered into my ear, "Inside that old willow tree, there's a large piece of gold." I walked over, I saw it myself, nearly 100 grams. And, as always, I desperately needed money, but I left it there, because I couldn't bear to take another bottle. of my son's blood. You might think I felt proud after walking away. I didn't. Greed consumed me. I couldn't sleep all night. More than once, I almost drove back to retrieve it. Is the curse I live with. I still don't know why the old man led me into that path. Maybe he gained something from it. Maybe it earned him a higher place among them. Sometimes I wish I had never accepted that delivery to that factory. Well, friends, tonight's story has come to an end. If you enjoyed it, you can support your channel by sharing this video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Couldn't find a poem for tonight. May God protect you, Tiger_Moon.